I was working the front desk at a hotel in Amsterdam when an American couple checked in at midnight. The man asked what time breakfast started. I told him 7 a.m. He said that was too early because they were still on Eastern Time, so could we serve breakfast at 10 a.m. instead? I explained breakfast ends at 10 a.m. It's a buffet for all guests. He asked if we could keep the buffet open late, just for them since they paid for breakfast in their room rate. I said no. That's not how hotel breakfast works anywhere in Europe. He pulled out his phone and showed me his Marriott Bonvox status. Platinum member since 2019. In America, platinum means something. I told him this wasn't a Marriott. He said all hotels are basically the same, and platinum status should transfer. This channel exists because I don't just tell travel stories, I decode cultural logic. If that's your speed, you'll want to stay for more. His wife suggested they could tip me to make it happen. I explained we don't take tips for changing hotel policies. He asked to speak to the owner at midnight. I told him I'd leave a note. He left a 1-star review saying our hotel doesn't understand customer service hierarchy. That same week, I watched an American woman argue with a tram conductor in Prague because she insisted she could pay cash directly on board. He explained you buy tickets before boarding. She said that's inefficient, and American public transportation figured out onboard payment decades ago. He just stared at her. Then, there was the guy in Copenhagen who tried to exchange his dollars at a restaurant because everywhere takes dollars. The waiter handed him back his $50 bill and pointed to an ATM. He said he shouldn't have to pay ATM fees in a tourist area, and that was just Tuesday. I was working at a pharmacy in Brussels when an American man walked in asking for his prescription. He handed me a crumpled paper from his doctor in Texas. I explained I couldn't fill American prescriptions. He'd need to see a Belgian doctor. He stared at me like I'd just denied him constitutional rights. It's a legal prescription from a licensed physician. I have refills. I told him that doesn't matter. Prescriptions aren't internationally valid. He pulled up his insurance app and showed me his pharmacy benefits. I have coverage in all 50 states. I pointed out Belgium wasn't a state. He said the EU was basically like states, right? I explained that's not how medical licensing works. He asked if we had a manager who understood international law. I was the head pharmacist. If you catch yourself shaking your head thinking, how is this real? That's exactly why I track this stuff full-time, so you don't have to. Subscribers never miss these cross-cultural meltdowns. He threatened to call the American embassy about medication access. I suggested he go to a Belgian urgent care clinic instead. He asked how much that would cost. I said probably around 60 euros. He was outraged that healthcare wasn't free in Europe. I told him Belgium isn't the UK. He said he thought all of Europe had free healthcare because of socialism. He left angry, came back 2 hours later with a proper Belgian prescription. I was working as a tour guide in Munich when an American tourist interrupted my explanation of Ludwig II to correct me about German geography. We were literally standing in Bavaria. He insisted Munich was in Austria because he'd studied World War II history extensively and knew the Nazis operated in Austria. I explained Munich is definitively in Germany, always has been, and is the capital of Bavaria. He said that couldn't be right because he'd driven through Austria to get here from Switzerland. I told him he probably drove through a corner of Austria, but Munich is German. He pulled out Google Maps to prove me wrong. Google Maps showed Munich in Germany. He zoomed out and said the borders must be wrong. His wife whispered something to him. He said, "Well, it's all the same region anyway. They all speak German." I continued the tour. 10 minutes later, he asked if we'd be seeing Hitler's bunker. I explained that's in Berlin, about 6 hours north. He said his travel agent told him Munich had all the WWE sites. I suggested his agent might have meant the documentation center. He asked if that was near the Berlin Wall. I told him again, Berlin Wall is in Berlin. He got frustrated and said European geography was confusing because the countries were too small. I was working at a train station in Rome when an American woman approached the ticket counter furious that she'd been fined on the regional train. She showed me the €50 fine and demanded I reverse it. I explained I just sell tickets. I can't cancel fines issued by conductors. She said the conductor was wrong because she had a ticket. I asked if she validated it. She stared blankly. I explained you have to stamp regional tickets in the yellow machines before boarding. She said nobody told her that. I pointed to the 15 signs in English explaining validation. She said those signs were unclear and anyway, she bought a ticket, so she paid. I explained buying a ticket isn't enough. Validation proves when you started using it to prevent fraud. She said that's a scam to find tourists who don't know better. I told her it's standard across Italy and most of Europe. She demanded to know why America doesn't have this problem. I suggested because American regional trains work differently. She said Italian trains should adapt to international standards. She asked if she could pay the fine in dollars to avoid the exchange rate. I said no. She asked to speak to whoever designed the validation system. She paid the fine in cash, then asked for a receipt in English for her travel insurance. I gave her the Italian receipt. She asked me to translate it. I pointed to the number 50. I was working at a post office in Lisbon when an American man wanted to mail a package to California. I waited and told him it would cost €35. He laughed and said, "That's ridiculous. In America, the same package costs maybe $12. I explained international shipping is expensive. He said Portugal is trying to rip off American tourists with inflated prices. I showed him the official postal rate chart. He studied it and insisted there must be a cheaper option. I explained there's economy shipping for €28, but it takes 3 weeks. He asked why Portuguese mail was so inefficient compared to USPS. I told him USPS international shipping costs similar amounts. He didn't believe me. He asked if he could use American stamps since they're more valuable. I said no, you need Portuguese stamps for Portuguese post. He asked if Amazon ships from Portugal. I said yes. He asked why he couldn't just use Amazon rates. I explained those are bulk commercial rates. He decided not to ship the package. He asked if he could leave it at the post office and have someone pick it up. I asked who would pick it up. He said whoever was going to California next. I stared at him. He said in small Texas towns, people do favors like that. I told him this was a national postal service in a capital city, not a community bulletin board. I was working at a restaurant in Stockholm when an American family sat down and immediately asked for tap water. I brought them a bottle of sparkling water. The father said no, tap water, free water. I explained we charge for water in Sweden. He insisted that's illegal. Water is a human right. I told him the tap water is excellent in Sweden, but in restaurants, water is a product we sell. He said in America, free water is standard, and refusing it would violate health codes. I explained, we're not in America. He asked to speak to the manager. I was the manager. He said this was a scam targeting tourists. I showed him the menu with water prices clearly listed. He said he shouldn't have to pay for water at a restaurant where he's already paying for food. I told him that's how Swedish restaurants work. He asked other diners if they paid for water. They all had bottles. He asked them if they thought it was fair. They looked confused by the question. He ordered 1 bottle of water for the whole family and made a big show of sharing it with 1 glass. When the bill came, he tried to tip me 15%. I explained we don't tip in Sweden. He insisted, saying good service deserves tips. I told him our wages are already fair. He left the cash anyway and said I'd earned it. I donated it to charity. I was working as a museum guide in Paris when an American man argued with me about which floor the Mona Lisa was on. I told him first floor. He insisted the sign said second floor. I explained in Europe, ground floor is 0, first floor is 1 level up. He said that's wrong because the floor you enter on is the first floor by definition. I told him that's American convention, not European. He said logic is universal, and the ground floor should be called the first floor everywhere. I explained we've used this system for centuries. He said it was designed to confuse tourists. I suggested he just go up one level. He asked why Europeans had to be different about everything. I said we could ask why Americans had to be different. He didn't appreciate that. He went upstairs, came back down, and asked where the bathrooms were. I said ground floor. He asked if I meant first floor. I said no, ground floor, the level we're on. He asked why I was being difficult. I pointed to the bathroom sign. He asked if there was an American information desk. There wasn't. I was driving a taxi in Berlin when an American passenger asked me to speed up because his dinner reservation was in 10 minutes across town. I was already going the speed limit. He offered me an extra 20 euros to go faster. I explained, I'm not risking my license for 20 euros. He said in New York, cabbies speed all the time. I told him this is Berlin. We follow traffic laws strictly. He said Germany was famous for the Autobahn with no speed limits. I explained the Autobahn is highways. We're in city center where limits are strictly enforced. He said he'd pay any ticket I got. I told him tickets here come with points on my license that could cost me my job. He seemed baffled that couldn't be solved with money. We hit a red light, and he asked why I stopped when no cars were coming. I explained that's illegal. He said in America, people run red lights late at night all the time if it's safe. I told him Germans don't do that. He asked if it was a cultural thing. I said it's a law thing. We arrived at his restaurant 4 minutes late. He blamed me for not taking his advice about which route to take. I'd been driving Berlin taxis for 12 years. I was working at a hotel in Athens when an American woman complained that her room was too hot. I explained the air conditioning was on, but it was August in Greece. She said the AC was broken because it wasn't cold enough. I checked the thermostat. It was set to 18 degrees Celsius and working fine. She asked why it showed 18 when the room felt like 75. I explained that's Celsius, not Fahrenheit. She asked why the hotel used Celsius. I told her because we're in Greece. She said international hotels should use Fahrenheit since Americans travel the most. I explained 18 Celsius is about 64 Fahrenheit. Quite cold. She insisted it felt warmer than that. I suggested the Mediterranean. Climate meant humidity was affecting her perception. She asked if we could switch the thermostat to Fahrenheit. I said no, it's a European AC unit. She asked to change rooms to one with American temperature settings. I explained all rooms use Celsius. She asked if there was an American hotel chain nearby. I suggested she could Google it. She left a review saying our hotel had broken air conditioning and confusing thermostats that made no sense. I was working at a grocery store in Oslo when an American man approached me holding a carton of milk, visibly upset. He said the expiration date was wrong. I looked at it. It said 12/08 to 24. He insisted that's December, 8 months away, which meant the milk was old stock they were trying to pass off as fresh. I explained in Europe, we write dates as day, month, year. He stared at me. I said it's August 12th, 4 days from now. He said that's a backwards system that makes no sense. I told him it goes from smallest unit to largest, which is logical. He said month, day, year is logical because that's how you say dates in English. August 12th. I pointed out Europeans also speak English and say the 12th of August. He said American English is standard international English. I explained Norway uses Norwegian primarily anyway. He asked why the date wasn't in Norwegian then. I said, because numbers are universal. He studied the carton suspiciously. He asked if other products had backwards dates. I confirmed all of them. He asked how Norwegians keep track of expiration dates without getting confused. I told him we learn it as children. He said this explained why he'd been buying expired products all week. I suggested none of them were actually expired. He showed me a yogurt cup he bought yesterday. It said 08 to 08 2024. That was yesterday. He realized he'd eaten fresh yogurt and panicked about expired yogurt. That was fine. He asked if there was a chart to convert European dates. I told him just swap the first two numbers in his head. He bought the milk, then asked if Norway used different numbers than America. I said no, numbers are the same. He asked if we used the same alphabet. I confirmed we used Latin alphabet. He seemed relieved that something was universal. The funny thing about working in European tourism is Americans arrive expecting the world to work like an American suburb with different accents. When reality hits, some adapt, some argue, and some write angry TripAdvisor reviews about how Europe refuses to modernize. Most eventually understand. The ones who don't usually stay in their hotel asking why CNN isn't on TV. I'll keep unpacking these stories whether you subscribe or not. But the people who do, they're the ones who get why this stuff actually matters. And somewhere right now, another American is confidently explaining to a confused Italian that ranch dressing is a fundamental human right that should be available at every restaurant.